In this video, we are going to start looking at Chapter 31. Chapter 31 covers inflation, so another very important macro concept measurement. So let's just go ahead and get started. So what is inflation? Inflation is an increase in the average level of prices. All right, so an important thing to note when talking about inflation, inflation isn't just a change in price or an increase in price. The price of a good, a particular good, that can increase and decrease for many reasons. All right, changes to supply and demand are going to affect the price of a good. All right, just if just one good or even a handful of goods, if the price of those goods goes up, that doesn't necessarily mean we have inflation. But if the kind of price of all goods rises, or the kind of average price level increases, then that's when we have inflation. So we are going to be measuring inflation or calculating inflation with what are known as a price index, all right, or price indices. A price index is a average price for a large and representative, that's not a R, large and representative bundle of goods. All right, so we're going to be looking at some of the different price indices that can be used in just a moment. So we want to keep in mind kind of the two important parts of this. Well, there are a couple of important parts of this. All right, but we're at large and representative. All right, those are going to be the ones that we're going to really key into because some of these average price bundle of goods, that's going to be kind of common among all of those. All right, but we will kind of look at them on the basis of how large and how representative that price index is. All right. So when we are trying to measure inflation, we are going to do so by calculating the inflation rate. A lot of times people will just say inflation. I'm probably going to do that as well. But the inflation rate, and a lot of times the inflation rate is what people mean when they say inflation, right? If they ever give you a percentage after it, then that's the inflation rate, not necessarily inflation. All right, so the inflation rate is a percentage change in a price index from one time period to another. We're going to put up the formula for the inflation rate in just a second. I'm going to try to give you some time to write this down. But it's going to look very similar to the GDP growth rate formulas. Right? We're just going to be kind of subtracting the old from the new and then dividing by the old and multiplying by 100. All right, so the inflation rate is notated with pi. All right, so pi, this is the inflation rate, and it is equal to pt minus pt minus 1 divided by pt minus 1 times 100%. All right, so the P's are the price index, whichever price index we choose to use. All right, and then the T's, of course, are kind of placeholders for the time periods. All right, so I've got it as T and T minus 1, kind of implying that it has to be one time period to the next. But just like with GDP, or real GDP, that's not necessarily the case, right? If we wanted to find the inflation rate from the 1940s to, I guess I could have gone with the 20s, from 1920 to 2020, right? We could do that, right, with this formula, all right? But just like with the GDP growth rate, we usually put the most recent year first, right, and then we subtract and divide by divide with the later year. All right, so that is our formula. Let's take a look at it in action. All right, so let's say we've got some price indices, right? P1, the price for P1, all right, so kind of time period 1, the price index was $367.14. And in time period 2, our price index was $371.75. All right, to calculate our inflation rate, we would take our most recent year, right? So kind of, so in this case, time period 2, the one that came after, right? 371.75. We would subtract the price index for the later time period. And then we would divide by that number as well. And then to put it in percentages, right, we would multiply that by 100%. All right, so we have 371.75 minus 367.14 divided by 367.14 times 100%. Once we punch all of that into our calculators, we should get an inflation rate of 1.26%. Right, and calculating a inflation rate using the price indices is just that easy, right? So not terribly difficult. All right, now let's talk about some of the commonly used price indices. All right, so there are three we're going to talk about, some more in depth than others. We have the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. We have the GDP Deflator, which hopefully we remember from chapter 26. And we have the Producer Price Index, or PPI. All right, and really this might be more properly written out as producer price indices, because as we're going to discuss in a little while, there are multiple of these. All right, so we're not going to actually go through these in order. We're going to save the Consumer Price Index for last. So what we're going to do is we are going to start with the GDP Deflator. All right, so if we don't remember, the GDP deflator wrote that way too big. All right, the GDP deflator is equal to the nominal GDP divided by the real GDP times 100%. All right, so because the GDP deflator is, of course, based off of GDP, right, this contains all final goods and services, right? At least the ones produced within the country in a year, right? So it is a very large bundle of goods, right? The largest of these three. However, the arguments could be made about how representative it is, but that also depends on what you're trying to use it for, right? Again, that's the GDP deflator. If we remember, let's say that we had a GDP deflator of 106.34%. All right, then that's telling us the prices in the most recent period, whatever it may be, are 6.34% higher than in the previous time period. All right, so that is how we could interpret it. We could also just use it as a, we also just use it as a price index. All right, then let's talk about our next price index. Right, these are the producer price indices, or PPIs. All right, so these measure the average price received by producers. The producer price indices, all right, these will include final and intermediate goods. And they exist for different industries, right? So, you know, a certain industry would have a bundle of goods that would be representative for that industry, and that's what they would base their producer price index off of. Another industry might not have the same things that they want to put in that bundle, so they might create their own. So this is very much for producers, not really for consumers, right? Which, you know, we could probably tell that from the name. All right, then last but certainly not least, we have the consumer price index. So this is the most commonly used price index, the CPI. It measures the average price for a basket of 80,000 goods and is weighted so that changes in major items have a larger impact. All right, so we're going to talk about several things with this. One, as far as the basket goes, 80,000 goods. That's pretty large. It might not be as large as all final goods and services, but that's a lot of goods and services, right? We also saw here that it's weighted so that these changes in major items have a larger impact. So if there is an increase, kind of a general increase in housing costs, right, consumers are going to feel that a lot more than the increase in the price of a carrot, right? So this basket is weighted, or the price index is weighted so that those major items, right, are going to really show the impact that they have when the price goes up. All right, the Consumer Price Index is compiled by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they do update the basket occasionally. Right, they have different categories for a bunch of different stuff. Right, so anything from housing to electronics to entertainment. I think they might even have that broken down more to specifically. It's probably just entertainment, and then in that TV, movies, music. All right, that's the one that I actually wanted to get to. All right, so the Bureau of Labor Statistics, right, wants this consumer price index to be representative. It wants to be a good representation of the American consumer, to see what the inflation rate they are facing is. All right, so when technology changes, they update this basket. Right, so when the switch was made from vinyl to 8 tracks, they probably at a certain point swapped out vinyl for the 8 tracks, right? Same thing when those gave way to cassettes, and then those gave way to CDs, and now MP3, and really just streaming, I guess, would probably be where we're at now. All right, so it is large and it is representative, right? Again, by making sure that they've got an updated list of goods that go in that basket, also by trying to weight those large items, so those big items that are going to have a larger impact in somebody's life, we want them to have the same kind of impact on the price index. All right, so we said the Consumer Price Index is one of the most commonly used price indexes, all right, and it's often used to calculate real prices. All right, so hopefully some of us remember what we mean when we say real. All right, so anything that's real, what does that mean? All right, well, if we remember, if we think back to real GDP, real GDP is GDP adjusted for inflation, right? Real prices is just prices adjusted for inflation. All right, so if you are trying to get an idea of how much something really costs, right? You don't want inflation involved in that, because that can kind of distort things a little bit, right? Then you would try to find the real price. All right, so that's going to be it for this video. In the next one, we're going to be again looking at the quantity theory of money. Yeah, I mean, that's basically it. Y'all have no frame of reference for what that is yet, unless you've been reading ahead in the textbook, which if you have, that's very good, right? But that is what we're going to be looking at, so we're really just going to be looking at some of the building blocks for the next chapter, all right? And we're going to see a lot of things that we've already looked at kind of cropping back up, all right? But that's it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one.